Morning. Okay. Hey everyone, this is Coleman. I'm leading partnerships with Origin Protocol. I have David with me today from Deconet, and we're going to talk about what Deconet is doing and how they're building on Origin Protocol.
Excellent. Happy to be here.
Yeah, why don't we begin with a short introduction about who you are and how you got involved in blockchain and the crypto world?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is David Sneider. I'm one of the co-founders over at Deconet. Deco.network is how you find us online. And at a high level, what we're doing is building tools for sustainable open source and a marketplace for code. We'll get into all of that in a second. And how I initially got involved in blockchain, well, I thought Bitcoin was interesting because I was reading about it on Hacker News in like late 2013. So I bought some, and I was always really skeptical, amongst my friend groups. I was like, okay, it's digital gold. I get that. That's kind of cool. And you can kind of use it on the dark web. I guess that's kind of a use case. But for me, when the light bulb really went off is when I first really understood the capabilities of Ethereum and all of the really interesting positive sum games and kind of like ways to create new systems from a game theory mindset was really exciting. And then from there, it just kind of became an obsession.
Yeah, I guess that leads right into our next question. Can you describe what Deconet is building and in a way that the audience can easily and fully understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, we are building a marketplace for code and other tools for sustainable open source. So it's really about creating ways to let people commercialize their code. So if you think about what Airbnb does for homeowners, Airbnb lets homeowners turn the extra room in their apartment into extra income, essentially in a click of a button, right? They don't have to set up a business. They don't have to drive demand. Google's AdWords product did the same thing for website publishers, kind of decades ago, where prior to AdWords existing, you had to go out and find your own demand, make deals with advertisers in order to drive revenue to your blog. We're doing the same thing for open source developers. And we're doing that by letting them sell proprietary licenses to open source code. And we can kind of get into some of the details of what dual licensing is and what copyleft is in a moment, as well as selling access to their code via API. So, yeah.
Yeah, can you explain how, like for someone who's not super deep into the open source world and doesn't understand licensing so well, how does someone's code who's that's published on GitHub or one of these open source code repositories, how does Deconet help them monetize that?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of define what dual licensing is here. So first of all, before we even get into that, like if you create something and you release it, like if you create some code and you put it up on GitHub, it's not like people can just start using it right away. When you assign a license to your code, that's basically you as the copyright holder telling everybody else how they can use it. And essentially you have three types of licenses. You have what are called permissive licenses, which basically means, hey, do whatever you want. You have copyleft, which is what is known as free software. So if I create something and you use it, then you have to open source your whole code base as well. It's highly macroeconomically efficient because things that are licensed under a copyleft provision, basically the whole community of developers are working on the same code base. And when I say free software, I mean free as in freedom rather than free as in beer, as they say. And then finally, there's proprietary licenses, which means, for example, you're paying me for the right to use my code however you like. So the way that dual licensing works specifically is, and this is how we're structuring and how it's typically done, is that code is released under this copyleft provision, which means anybody can use it, but if they use it, they also have to open source their code. It kind of flows downstream like a waterfall. Now, if you're a bank or a business or somebody who doesn't want to open source your code, but you want to use that project, you have to compensate the initial developer and purchase a proprietary license. And so we're a turnkey solution for doing just that. So that's how it kind of works on licensing. And that's a marketplace we're building, and that's of course why we're working with you guys.
So what are some of the benefits of building this on blockchain or a decentralized fashion?
Absolutely. So the main big one is that like when people purchase a license from a party, they're essentially purchasing rights, and they don't want to have to trust either the intermediary or any of the other parties. So by putting it on the immutable ledger, that is the Ethereum blockchain, it's essentially there for all of time as long as Ethereum nodes are running. And that gives all of the parties in the system confidence that they're not going to be defrauded, that somebody can't come back and say like, oh no, I didn't actually sell you that license, so now I'm going to sue you. And it also protects the seller from somebody, you know, going in Photoshop and creating a PDF of a license and says, here's my license, I can use this. So by putting this on blockchain, there's evidence that the transaction took place, and we're using the Ethereum blockchain and IPFS to kind of manage that process.
Where are you guys in your development or product roadmap so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, you know, March 19th, 2018 right now, and we've got our initial smart contracts are in a code freeze, and they're in the midst of being audited right now. And then once they're back from auditing, we'll be able to essentially launch our product and start letting developers commercialize their code on our network.
Can you tell us a little bit more about these specific smart contracts, what they look like, what functions they serve?
Yeah, so right now we're trying to be pretty light in terms of what is actually touching the blockchain. So in the example of purchasing a software license, basically if you purchase a software license from me, what we record to the Ethereum blockchain is 4 things: the buyer, you; the seller, me; the price; the time, I guess 5 things, and a reference. And in the reference ID, we are referencing the proprietary license, which is stored on Filecoin.
Great. Can you tell us any of the major milestones you've accomplished so far, or the current thing that you're working on? I guess it's kind of on pause because the code is being audited, but what was like the last milestone you guys achieved?
The last milestone we achieved was actually like, you know, having this up and running on the testnet, which was a prerequisite to it being audited. So having all of the functionality working in terms of all of the front end, all of the smart contracts, and basically having the system work on the Ethereum testnet is basically like having it work with fake money. So, you know, there's a lot to get to that point, both from a technology side as well as kind of a legal side, making sure all of our ducks are in a row, and that when somebody purchases one of these licenses, it's not just like on the blockchain, but is also a legitimate license purchase that will hold up in court, so to speak.
And where do you see Deconet by the end of this year?
Yeah, perfect. So this notion of selling access to open source code, we really see as the first step in building a future of financially sustainable open source. Where this goes and what we're building for is a world where, let's say you and I are working on an open source software project, and the project itself doesn't have, there's no like entity for it to pay, but $1 of value flows in either because we sold a software license, sold access to an API, or people donate to us. We are setting up the infrastructure. So you could get 34 cents, I would get 33 cents. And then we're incentivizing a culture where we take the last 33 cents of the $1 that came into our system and sending it to a smart contract where it automatically and equitably rewards all of the software packages that we depend on, kind of down the value stream. And creating this kind of pay it forward culture in open source where you're perpetually rewarding the projects that you depend on. We'd like to see that flywheel started by the end of the year.
And is everyone who's contributing or doing commits to these open source projects, are they also going to be compensated? How are you thinking about that? Because, you know, a lot of these projects have contributors from all over the world working on them.
Yeah, exactly. So our initial focus is more, I guess you could say, on like modules and packages, which tend to have fewer contributors. You know, as we kind of scale up to larger contributor projects, which is the direction we're headed in, yes, like in order to properly commercialize, all of the contributors would need to essentially sign something equivalent of like a contributor license agreement that is where they're giving their copyright rights to the project itself so that they could then commercialize. But yeah, I think there's a couple different schemes here, right? Where one, again, using the blockchain is money could be held in escrow for a given developer, and then they could get pinged on it over their email, sort of often in an automated fashion. And if they don't collect it within a 60 or 90-day period, it goes back to either the person who did the initial donation or payment or to the other people on the team. There's a couple different schemes to set up here. And I think what we'll see evolving over time is that those different payment schemes and different payment models will differ based on the size of the project and the type of the project.
Who do you expect the first wave of users to be, and what about like the second wave?
Yeah, so the first wave of users is definitely blockchain developers and people associated with blockchain. One of the things that we are doing as a go-to-market strategy, if you will, is basically hosting a hackathon, a virtual hackathon, where we're in conversations with a number of blockchain projects where they will be hosting contests through our network, which are, we have an extended network of 10,000 plus developers and product people and designers at this point. And companies can create a bounty on our network and say, hey, you know, we'd like a block explorer built for a blockchain, and various teams can compete, kind of like an innovation challenge. So really focused on blockchain projects right now, just because, of course, there was nearly $6 billion in ICO funding last year, and a lot of these projects are under the gun to deliver. And of course, the amount of people who can develop is finite. So creating rails to get that done is important. So yeah, the first wave, definitely blockchain devs and people associated with web development around blockchain. And then in terms of the second wave, you know, I think we're pretty focused on this core group right now. There's a couple of things that we can kind of experiment with. Yeah, I'm not sure who the second wave will be at this point.
I think this is something you've already touched on a little bit, but why do you think a decentralized offering is better than a centralized offering? And what kind of principles are guiding you in developing this project?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One, like the most immediate thing is that it lets people have essentially like compliance in perpetuity where they can trust no one. So that's like the immediate reason to put it on blockchain. But two, as I was kind of alluding to with this notion of an unbanked software producing entity getting paid and then having the payments distributed to the contributors, that is very much like a Web 3.0 style entity, which will be built on blockchain. So we're putting the foundations in place for a future where open source projects can functionally be DAOs, so be organizations that are governed by rules and smart contracts. So there's an immediate business need to put it on blockchain today, and then it's also kind of future-proofing the world and creating some infrastructure for the future of software development, where we really see things going. And then the other reason for, you know, especially for the users, like if you look at, I guess what you would call centralized code marketplaces like Code Canyon, you know, Code Canyon at their bottom tier takes a 70% cut of every transaction. So that's extremely large. And even if you look at something like GitHub, in the GitHub marketplace, GitHub takes a 40% cut of people who sell their services via GitHub. So there's these significant margins that these incumbents are taking. And by using essentially like a token model to create a better positive sum game where we as a company can generate revenue, developers can generate revenue, and projects can get coding done, and all those three parties are significantly more aligned, that's another reason to just kind of decentralize and tokenize this offering. Yeah.
It sounds like you're pretty passionate about open source projects. Like, what are some of the principles that you guys believe in that's helping you guide your project's development?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a great question. You know, there's this digital infrastructure that exists, and it's essentially free for the most part, and it's maintained by this almost monastic class of people around the world who are living off of the donations of the few people who know about them, while literally trillions of dollars are captured by the companies and applications, built on this underlying essentially free infrastructure. And it's not necessarily the fault of any of the parties involved. It's just that's kind of the nature of the system. So there's an opportunity for us to essentially do like a systems level optimization here, whereby we can more equitably make sure that people who are value producers are capturing more of the value. And although that's kind of like, I think, a good meaningful cause because it's helpful for those maintainers, it also has the effect of potentially speeding up the rate of innovation. If more people are working on maintaining and building underlying infrastructure, and we're already seeing this as a macro trend taking place with blockchain, right? Like even the emergence of Bitcoin and Ethereum, there's a cultural shift happening where people are realizing that you can be compensated for working on things at the protocol layer. So, we see ourselves very much in line with that movement.
Yeah, I think the economic aspect of cryptocurrencies and blockchain and incentives is something that's not as focused on as like technology or price movement or something, but it's definitely like super revolutionary idea.
Yeah, it's so easy to kind of get wrapped up in the day-to-day of token prices, but people like that's what we are doing here is frankly, like it's a big experiment, this whole blockchain thing, right? Where there's the number of use cases is significantly lower than like the amount of money in this space. But that's why our team and teams like ours are just building every day, because we have this idea of the way that the future could work, and then we're just building the pragmatic steps to get there.
What does the token do on the Deconet platform? What is your token?
Yeah, so the token essentially serves two purposes. One, we have a token curated registry, which means that users on the network basically can say what projects get featured, what are the best projects, what are bad projects, essentially curate the registry. And the way that a token curated registry works at a simple level, if you're a candidate and you want to list something, you have to stake some tokens. If people don't think that you should be listed, your stake can be challenged. And then there's a token weighted voting period that determines whether you get on or off the network. Additionally, in kind of our like enterprise offering, if you will, for companies that want to host contests on our network, in order to do that, they have to hold a certain amount of tokens to access the contest.
Yeah, my friend Julian Martinez, who works for Quantstamp, he just finished a 2-part series on token curated registries. I'll link that to the comments or to the description below so people can learn more about token curated registries. What are your general thoughts about token economics? Like, where do you see all this stuff headed?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question to answer in the abstract, because there's some phenomenal examples of token economics, and then there's some really horrible examples of token economics, like on a project-to-project basis. But generally, I would say at the most macro level, like from a business's perspective, businesses are going to do, for the most part, what's going to maximize their bottom line, so to speak. So if there's a system in where they can buy and hold tokens that also benefits their bottom line, they will do so. From an individual or consumer level, I think, if you look around, like anything that human beings possess, they cannot help but associate their identity to. So I think we'll see a day in the future where when people hold tokens of a certain company or a certain project, they essentially feel as if and are members of that community and that project.
Why did you decide to partner with Origin Protocol, company I work for?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's exciting about Origin is basically kind of like a turnkey marketplace solution, right? So as there's buying and selling on our network, We want to work with people who have it really figured out. Obviously, we're thinking about a lot of things, and frankly, that's the benefit of a good partnership is it lets us abstract away complexity by being able to depend on a good platform. There's nested people depending on platforms. As we create infrastructure for people to depend on some infrastructure, we also want to depend on great infrastructure ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the principles guiding us is that don't reinvent the wheel. And this stuff is all open source. We want to collaborate with other great quality projects like yours. Um, what are your general thoughts on decentralization as a movement? Do you see this as a bigger thing than just cryptocurrencies? How do you feel about decentralization?
Yeah, I think everything is still really early, so this is definitely kind of speculative. I think that once we see a really cash flow positive business that's differentiator is the fact that they're using blockchain. That's when the industry will really kick off and really start, when kind of people from a venture capital mindset see that, oh, in the same way that Salesforce leverages the cloud, companies can leverage blockchain. Then there's the whole government aspect. I think that's slightly outside the scope of this conversation, but there's like if every vendor and every store in the world accepts a privacy coin, and people are like thinking about their taxes in a much more voluntary way, that has some massive societal implications. And then I think culturally, one of the most exciting things about this is the fact that like you now go to conferences and you hear people who are working on projects and they're standing up in front of a group of people and saying, we don't want the power, right? We don't want to control the system. And I think that as kind of as a cultural theme is really impactful and potentially the most exciting part about working in this industry.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's lots more to think about than just tokens or whatever people tend to talk about. And I'm really excited to see decentralization as even like a social movement, what the implications of that are.
Totally. I mean, just to riff on that, right? In the context of our project, right? Like if let's say you're from a small town and you've taught yourself how to code online. Basically, your options today are you can only do one thing. You have to move to a big city and get a job. And when you move to the big city, the income is staying in the big city, and you're also taking your knowledge there. But if you're able to stay where you're at and generate income and not be forced to like do 12 to 24 months of open source work to prove that you're good enough to do remote work, and you can kind of keep the value distributed rather than in the city, that town that you're from benefits. Your income stays in that town, your knowledge stays in that town. That's really exciting.
How did you build your community, and how are you engaging with them?
Yeah, so the extended like developer and product community, a lot of partnerships. We're basically working with a number of like other hackathon groups as well as kind of development schools and product schools and boot camps. So that's really the source of our community. And then we've done like a little bit of media here and there where people kind of get the mission of the project, and that's been a community driver as well. And then in terms of how we engage with them, in our Telegram group, I'll plug it right here. It's t.me deco_network. That's really where we carry on the conversation.
Yeah, I'll put all the Deco network links in the description so people can easily access that.
Cool.
What are some of the other projects or companies that you're excited about?
Yeah, well, I definitely like what you guys are doing. I think it's like a home run use case for Ethereum. The other projects I really like are people who are doing like analytics on where tokens are going. There's a few folks who are basically kind of like tracking. It's kind of like Etherscan on steroids, where they're selling back to token projects and saying like, hey, here's what's happening with your token ecosystem. If we kind of take this view that the token holders are community members, getting a deep insight into what they're doing with the token is something that is really beneficial. And then, definitely kind of keeping an eye on a lot of the Gen 2 blockchains, some of the Ethereum killers, if you will. Like, I like, Quantum and their proof of stake work. I think that that's obviously important, because just random number crunching for, certainly is not sustainable from an environmental point of view.
Yeah. You got any fun or crazy stories since you've been involved in crypto? I know it's like kind of a crazy space.
Yeah. So my co-founder is a guy named Chris Casano, and he's been in the space since like 2013. He was actually the inventor and patent holder of the first Bitcoin hardware wallet. And in addition to selling hardware wallets, he used to laser engrave people's public key on like little dog tags or whatever. So then people could like be like, hey, send me Bitcoin or whatever. And one time, I think this was in 2014, somebody sent him a key, and then the guy like immediately followed up. It's like, oh shit, delete that email. That's my private key. Mm-hmm. Which is like kind of no big deal. You could just transfer the Bitcoin. But what was really crazy is the guy had the public key tattooed on his body, and he had sent Chris the private key, and essentially like ruined his tattoo because now the private key was exposed. Pretty outrageous. If that guy's out there, feel free to like reach out to us. Maybe Chris still has the email. It'd be fun to reconnect.
I hope for that guy's sake, Chris didn't empty his.
He didn't, like Chris is he like, yes, deleted the email, but it's like the cat's out of the bag, right? Can you ever, that's
That's pretty funny. Where do you see blockchain and crypto in 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah. I don't know. I think that like we could definitely. I think that one of my favorite critiques of the whole industry at large is that like only nerds will ever use this stuff, which I still think is a valid technique. So there's still a lot of use cases to be developed. I frankly don't know. I just can. I'd like to think that it could be an impactful thing. There's probably like unintended consequences of decentralization that nobody has even thought of yet. So yeah, it's a good question to kind of think on, but I don't necessarily have any like 10-year predictions.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to even see, a few months out. That's right. Is there anything else you'd like the audience to know about Deconet or what you're building or how they could get involved?
Yeah, just that if this is interesting to people, join our community, ask us questions, read our material. While we are building technological infrastructure to solve technical problems, this is also, we're also part of this kind of cultural movement of both decentralization and making sure people are equitably rewarded for the work that they're doing. So it's something that we're really excited about, and always excited about connecting with people who are too.
Great. That's it for me. Thank you for your time, David. I'll make sure to post all of those relevant links in the description. And if anyone has any questions for David or for myself, please follow up. Yeah, I'm sure anyone who wants to get involved is welcome. Yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Thanks for the time. Thanks everybody for watching.
All right. See ya.